Some knocks on the door come like warnings, others, like ghosts from an old life. That night, Mark's knock sounded like both. It had been over a year since I'd last seen him, the kind of friend you fall out of orbit with, not out of malice, but because life quietly drifts you apart. We used to be inseparable once. Study nights that bled into dawn, bad beer, reckless plans for a future we thought we could command. And now here he was, standing on my doorstep, soaked from the rain that had been falling all afternoon, with a bag that looked far too small to hold a life. He gave a sheepish smile, the kind that carried more apology than hope. "Hey," he said. His voice was hoarse, tired. "I'm kind of in a bad spot." I didn't make him explain. Not on the threshold, not with water dripping off his jacket and onto my clean floor. Instead, I stepped aside, a silent invitation. Old instincts, I suppose, the ones that tell you to offer shelter first, ask questions later. Inside, the air smelled like the lemon candles I always lit after work. It was warm, safe, and watching Mark shuffle in, trying to make himself small, I felt a knot of guilt twist in my chest. How fragile he looked. How easy it would be to say yes. "Just for a few days," he said quickly, seeing the hesitation flicker across my face. "Until I figure something out." He didn't have to beg. I was already nodding before the words fully left his mouth. I set him up on the couch, bringing out an extra blanket, one of the good ones I usually kept folded neatly in the linen closet. I offered a fresh towel, the Wi-Fi password, even a spare toothbrush from the emergency pack I kept for guests. Mark smiled with a gratitude that almost looked like shame. We talked a little, just enough to fill the spaces between the obvious questions. He told me about losing his job, a startup that folded almost overnight, leaving him without severance, without warning. His roommate, not willing to cover the rent on their own, had already found someone new. No job, no home, no plan. As he spoke, I kept nodding, making the right noises, pretending not to notice how lost he sounded. The city can be cruel to those who stumble. We both knew that. Later, long after I retreated to my room and closed the door, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint creaks and sighs of a second heartbeat under my roof. It was only supposed to be a few days. Only a few. At first, it was easy enough to pretend nothing had changed. I went to work. Mark stayed behind. When I came home, he'd be there, half watching television, half scrolling through his phone, feet tucked under the blanket I had once neatly folded. Every night he told me he was working on it. Applications sent, emails drafted, interviews lined up, maybe. But the proof of it never quite made itself known. Days melted into each other. 3 became 5. 5 blurred into 10. And somehow, the spare toothbrush became a permanent fixture beside mine. His jacket, once hung politely by the door, now lounged casually over the back of my dining chair. His shoes, kicked off carelessly, greeted me before I could even step into the living room. I tried to tell myself it was fine. Mark was going through a rough patch. Anyone would be shaken. It wasn't like he was a bad guest, not exactly. Yet small things gnawed at me, like mice quietly chewing holes through the fabric of comfort. Dirty dishes left to dry in the sink. Takeout containers stacked in my trash can, forgotten. The faint smell of unwashed clothes that clung to the cushions no matter how many candles I lit. It wasn't just the clutter. It was the way my home, the one place where everything made sense, began to feel like someone else's territory. Mark sprawled across the couch as if it belonged to him. He commandeered my Netflix account, breezing through shows I'd been saving for myself. He borrowed my favorite hoodie without asking, left crumbs between the pages of my books, adjusted the thermostat to his liking. And still, I said nothing. Because what was I supposed to say? That his presence, once a kindness, once a favor, was beginning to press against me like a weight I hadn't agreed to carry for this long? Some nights I lay awake, hearing the faint clatter of him rummaging in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. Other nights I found myself creeping into my own bathroom, heart pounding, irrationally afraid of bumping into the shadow of someone who no longer felt like a guest but not quite like a roommate either. In between all that silence, one bitter seed quietly planted itself in my chest. When is he planning to leave? It took just one moment, a small one, almost laughably trivial, for the weight of it all to tip. It was a Sunday morning, the kind I used to savor, quiet, slow, coffee in hand, a book balanced on my knees, sunlight pouring into the living room. My ritual, my peace. Mark was already awake, stretched lazily across the couch, bowls and plates scattered around him like trophies from a night I hadn't been part of. I barely noticed at first, stepping over discarded socks, brushing aside the low hum of the TV. But then I saw it. My coffee table, scratched. A deep, ugly mark gouged across the polished wood I had saved months to buy. A careless act. A cup without a coaster, a plate dragged without thought. And when I asked, carefully, too carefully, Mark only shrugged. "Relax," he said, without even looking away from the screen. "It's just a table. Just a table." The words rang in my ears, sharp and sour. It wasn't just the table. It wasn't just the clutter, or the smell, or the endless parade of promises to figure things out. It was the casual way he dismissed what mattered to me. My space, my comfort, my rules, as if he had some unspoken claim over them now. That afternoon, I sat him down. Not angrily, not dramatically. Just two old friends, sitting across from each other with a wide, aching distance between them. "I think," I said slowly, measuring every word, "it's time we figured out when you're moving on. You've had some time to breathe. I need my space back." For a moment, Mark said nothing. He stared at me as if I'd spoken another language. And then, the twist, sharp and unexpected. His face crumpled into something raw and ugly. "So that's it," he said, voice low. "You're kicking me out? After everything?" I tried to explain. Tried to make him understand that this wasn't betrayal, it wasn't cruelty, it was survival. My home had stopped feeling like mine. I needed it back before I started resenting not just him, but myself too. Mark didn't want to hear it. He shook his head, muttering something under his breath about fake friends, about how he should have known better. The guilt hit hard. It always does when you hurt someone who once trusted you. But underneath the guilt was a steady, pulsing relief I couldn't ignore. For the first time in weeks, I could see the outline of my own life again. Faint, but waiting. Mark left the next morning. No dramatic farewell, no slammed doors or shouted accusations. Just the low shuffle of his feet across the hallway, the muted thud of his bag dropping against the floor. I stayed in my room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet, heavy movements of a friendship folding itself into something unrecognizable. When I finally emerged hours later, the apartment felt different. Colder, somehow. Too clean. Too still. The hoodie he had borrowed hung loosely over the arm of the couch. A forgotten pair of socks slumped in the corner like tiny, defeated flags. The faintest trace of his cheap cologne still clung to the air, a ghostly reminder that someone else had, for a time, occupied this life with me. I spent the afternoon putting the apartment back together, throwing away the empty cartons, washing the dishes that weren't mine, scrubbing the scratch on the table, though I knew it would never quite disappear. It wasn't anger that kept my hands busy, it was something softer. Sadness, maybe. Or mourning. Not just for the lost friendship, but for the person I used to be. The one who believed kindness alone could carry the weight of two people's broken lives. In the days that followed, I started hearing whispers. Mutual friends reaching out, cautious, careful. Mark had told them his version, that I had thrown him out onto the street without mercy, that I had abandoned him when he needed me most. Some believed him, some didn't. But strangely, I found I didn't care as much as I thought I would. I knew the truth, the quiet truth that never makes for good stories. That sometimes, protecting yourself looks cruel to those who have learned to take without giving back. I hadn't failed Mark. I had simply stopped failing myself. And though the apartment still felt a little too big, a little too hollow, I knew I would fill it again. With laughter that was mine. With quiet mornings and coffee cups set gently on polished wood. With peace that didn't ask me to bleed for it.